It was a chilly evening in the city, the kind of night where the city lights glimmered against the dark sky and the streets were filled with a quiet, almost magical energy. Inside one of the most exclusive restaurants, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. The place was full of people dressed in their finest clothes, tailored suits, glittering jewelry, and designer dresses. It was the kind of event where only the wealthiest and most influential people were invited, and every guest seemed to be someone important. The soft sound of jazz music played in the background, adding to the air of sophistication. Waiters and waitresses moved between the tables, offering silver platters of delicate hors d'oeuvres and refilling glasses of wine. The soft clink of glasses and the low hum of conversations created a sort of rhythm that made the evening feel like it was part of a grand performance. But despite the luxury of it all, no one paid much attention to the staff, at least not in the way they did to each other. One of those waitresses who was working her shift that evening was a young woman. She'd been at this restaurant for almost a year, doing what she could to get by. She wasn't part of the glittering world around her, but she had learned how to navigate it with a quiet grace. She knew her place, she had to, after all, if she wanted to keep her job. It wasn't easy working in a place like this, where everyone seemed so polished and successful, but she kept her head down, did her work, and smiled whenever she had to. To most of the guests, she was just another waitress, a face they saw and forgot as soon as they looked away. But she had a story of her own, one that no one knew. Beneath the neatly tied hair and the crisp uniform, she was someone who had once dreamed of something much bigger than serving food or refilling drinks. From a young age, music had been her passion. She had grown up in a home where music was always playing, where every moment seemed to carry a tune. She'd been a piano prodigy as a child, practicing for hours every day. But over time, life had gotten in the way. Her family struggled financially, and as much as she loved playing the piano, she had to let go of that dream. There were bills to pay and responsibilities that came first. So the piano that once filled her home with beautiful melodies now sat gathering dust, a forgotten part of her life. Still, every time she walked past a piano, a part of her would ache. She missed it, missed the way the keys felt under her fingertips, the way the music seemed to speak her emotions when words couldn't. But that was a long time ago, and she had accepted that it wasn't her future. She would never be a professional musician, and that was just the way life went. But that evening, something strange happened. As she was moving between tables, carrying plates and pouring wine, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. The event coordinator, a frazzled-looking woman with a headset on, was speaking with one of the restaurant managers in hushed tones. She was talking about the night's musical performance, something that was supposed to be a highlight of the evening. The pianist they had hired had canceled last minute, and there was no backup plan. "I don't know what we're going to do," the coordinator said, clearly stressed. "The guests are expecting live music. We can't just leave them hanging." The manager looked equally stressed. "Isn't there someone here who can play?" The coordinator glanced around at the staff, her eyes briefly landing on the young waitress. The thought of her stepping in didn't even cross her mind. After all, who would expect a waitress to be able to play the piano? But the young woman couldn't help herself. She had overheard the conversation, and something inside her stirred. She felt a strange urge to speak up, to offer her help. Without really thinking, she walked up to the coordinator. "I can play," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but filled with an unexpected confidence. The coordinator stopped mid-sentence, surprised. "You play?" she asked, blinking in disbelief. "Yes," the waitress nodded, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what had come over her. She hadn't touched a piano in years, but something in that moment made her feel like she had no choice but to offer. For a moment, the coordinator just stared at her as if trying to process what was happening. Then, without saying much, she motioned for the waitress to follow her. "Well, I guess you're our only option. Come on then, let's see what you've got." The waitress followed her to the corner of the room, where a grand piano stood under a spotlight. It was beautiful, gleaming under the soft lighting. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room as she sat down on the bench. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the keys. The room was full of important people, people who were used to seeing world-class performers. She wasn't sure if she could do this, but she knew she had to try. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, her fingers hesitated, unsure. The first few notes were shaky, and she could feel the tension in the air. But then something clicked. The music began to flow from her fingertips as if it had never left. She wasn't thinking about the guests in the room or about how she was just a waitress. She was lost in the music, just as she had been years ago. Her hands moved faster, gaining confidence with every note. It was a piece she had learned when she was younger, a classical piece she had almost forgotten. But the familiarity of the melody brought back memories of her childhood, of the long hours spent practicing, of the joy that music had once brought her. She felt a wave of emotion surge through her. She wasn't just playing for the guests. She was playing for herself, for the dream she had buried so long ago. The room fell silent. The guests, who had been chatting amongst themselves just moments before, were now frozen, listening intently. The music seemed to fill every corner of the room, drawing everyone in. It was as if time had stopped. For those few minutes, the world outside the restaurant disappeared. All that existed was the sound of the piano and the young woman playing it. The more she played, the more she forgot about her nerves. The music seemed to take over, and she lost herself in it. She could feel the guests' eyes on her, but it didn't matter anymore. She was no longer the waitress. She was just a person, playing the music that had once been her passion. When she finished, the last note lingered in the air. The room was still. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the silence broke into a wave of applause. The guests stood up, clapping enthusiastically. Some were even on their feet, clearly amazed at what they had just witnessed. She sat there, almost stunned herself. Had it really just happened? She had done it. She had stepped up and she had played. And in doing so, she had somehow stunned the most important people in the room. The applause seemed to go on forever, and for a moment, the young woman simply sat there, lost in the disbelief of it all. But as she looked around, she noticed something else. People were approaching her. They were talking to her, congratulating her. It was clear that they had seen something in her that they hadn't expected, and in that moment, something shifted inside her. Maybe she hadn't left her dream behind after all. As the applause died down, the young woman remained seated at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. It felt like everything around her had stopped. The chatter, the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz music that had been playing before, it all faded into the background. In that instant, the only sound she could hear was the pounding of her own heart in her chest. She had done it. She had played, and the reaction from the crowd was nothing like what she had expected. The moment she finished, the guests had erupted into applause, but she hadn't expected that. The room, which moments ago had been filled with idle conversation and laughter, had gone completely still. Then, as the final note rang out, they seemed to realize what had just happened. The silence that followed was thick, almost heavy, and then, as if a dam had burst, the room exploded with applause. She had been performing for herself, not for anyone else. She hadn't expected to wow the crowd or impress anyone. She had simply wanted to play the music that had been buried deep inside her for so long. But the way the crowd responded, standing, clapping, their faces filled with awe, was something she had never experienced before. It was as if, for just a few moments, she wasn't just the waitress. She was someone else, someone special. As the applause began to fade, she slowly rose from the piano bench, almost unsure of what to do next. It was the first time in years that she had felt this kind of attention, and it made her feel strange, both humbled and overwhelmed. She wasn't used to this. She had always worked in the background, unnoticed, quietly doing her job. But now, it was as if everything had changed in an instant. A few people from the crowd were already approaching her, their faces bright with admiration. She wasn't sure what to say. She had never been the type to seek attention, and now it was all on her. Wow. That was amazing, one of the guests said, his eyes wide. He was an older man dressed in a sharp suit, his voice filled with genuine amazement. I didn't know you could play like that. Yeah, you were incredible. Another person added, a woman this time, clapping her hands in excitement. I had no idea we had a hidden gem among the staff. The young woman smiled nervously, unsure of how to respond. Thanks, she said softly. I haven't played in a long time. The man, still clearly impressed, leaned in a little closer. You should do this more often. You've got real talent. There was a pause, and then he added, almost as if thinking aloud, You should think about performing professionally. Her eyes widened at his words. Professional musician? It felt so far from the life she had built for herself. She had given up on that dream long ago, after all. It wasn't practical. She had responsibilities now. And yet, hearing him say those words, hearing the sincerity in his voice, made something inside her stir. Before she could respond, another person approached her, a woman this time, who had been quietly watching from the back of the room. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, and her eyes were focused on the waitress with an intensity that made her feel both nervous and curious. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help but notice your performance," the woman said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "You were exceptional. Absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," the waitress replied, still feeling a little overwhelmed by the attention. The woman smiled, her gaze lingering for a moment. "You know, I'm a music producer," she continued. "I work with a lot of artists, and I have to say you've got something special. If you're serious about pursuing music, I think you could really go somewhere." The words hit her like a wave. A music producer? Was she hearing this right? She had never, in all her years of playing the piano, imagined that someone like her, someone who had given up on her dreams, would be standing here, being told by a professional that she had a chance. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I mean, I've been working here for a while, and..." The woman cut her off gently but with a kind smile. "I understand. But listen, I see something in you. You've got the talent. It's raw, but it's there. And if you're willing to work for it, I could help you get started. I have some contacts in the industry, and I think they would be very interested in you." Her mind was racing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? Was she really being offered a chance to do something she had once dreamed of? "It seemed too good to be true, I don't know," she started to say, but the producer interrupted her again. "Don't let doubt stop you," the woman said firmly, her eyes locking with hers. "I'm serious. This is your chance to finally go after what you love. Don't let fear or the past hold you back. You have a gift, and it would be a shame to waste it." The waitress felt her heart flutter, her emotions tangled. She had spent so many years convincing herself that her dream was impossible, that music was just a fantasy she had to let go of. But now, here she was, in the middle of a glamorous gala, being offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Could she really do this? Could she really walk away from her job, from the life she had built, and try to become a professional musician? Before she could fully process what was happening, the music producer handed her a card. "Call me if you're interested." "I think you should at least explore it." "You won't know unless you try." The young woman took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, not quite sure what else to say. But the producer smiled, her eyes kind and encouraging. "You're welcome. Don't forget to call," she said before walking away, leaving the young woman standing there, still holding the card, her mind spinning. As the evening wore on, the waitress couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn in a direction she had never imagined. She had come into the evening simply trying to do her job, nothing more, nothing less. She had never expected that stepping up to that piano would change everything, but now she couldn't ignore the truth. The music, the applause, the offer from the producer, it all felt like something she couldn't walk away from. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She finished her shift, still in a daze, her thoughts racing. She kept turning the music producer's card over and over in her hands, as if expecting it to disappear if she didn't hold on tight enough. When she finally made her way home, she sat down on her couch, the card resting on the table in front of her. It felt heavy with possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about what might have been. What if she really did pursue music? What if she took a chance on herself? The thought was terrifying, but it also filled her with a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know where this would lead. She didn't know if she could make it as a musician, but one thing was certain. She wasn't the same person she had been that morning. The girl who had only dreamed of playing the piano was now staring at the possibility of making that dream a reality, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it might actually happen.